Hello, this is Sam Simon, also known as Dementia Man. And this is my blog for the week of June, let's see, the 14th. Um, and I am delighted to welcome a guest. And if you've been listening to my blogs, you know that this is Elder Abuse Awareness Month, as well as Brain Awareness Month and the like. But I've been focusing on the issue of elder abuse and resources. And I found maybe the best resource so far, a real human being. Not only that, this is Rabbi Alexandra Stein. She is one of the rabbis at Temple Rodef Shalom in Falls Church, Virginia, which is where my wife and I, Susan, my cognitive navigator, and I belong, um, and have for 53 years, both past presidents. How about that? We're, we're aging institutions at that very large and beautiful place to be. But um, Alexandra is one of the newer, younger rabbis. She's in charge of many things, including keeping our younger adults engaged uh, with the congregation, making sure we have programming associated with that. But she also teaches. She's a real rabbi, of course, Hebrew Union College, right, Alexandra? And we were going, Susan and she was hosting a summer study group, Lumud, I guess is what we call it. And we were going through some of the commandments, and there was this commandment, right? Everybody might know the fifth commandment is honor your mother and father. Um, and the topic sort of came up, but what if one of the parents is abusive? What happens then? What if you don't like your parents? What if, I mean, it didn't go into that, but this particular discussion we had, and what is the obligation of children to parents that might have been abusive or more? And it was really interesting. And I actually ran into that recently reading again in the context of um, Elder Abuse Awareness Month, and also read somebody talked about um, one of the proverbs that had the same advice that she had. And I'll steal her thunder briefly, but it was by and large, um, you're still obligated to take care of them. But you don't have to stay in danger. All right, no, just easy. But I was hoping we could do is have a little bit of a broader discussion about ethical responsibilities, intergenerational
Mhm.
ethical, as somebody goes into a cognitive, mine's Alzheimer's, it could be some other thing, or it could be some other illness. And how do we deal with it? So with that, this is Rabbi Alexandra Stein, and I want to say welcome to Dementia Man blog, and say a little bit about yourself, and then help me jump into this topic.
For sure. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you, Sam, for all of the wonderful work you do in the world in many different domains, including this. So as Sam was saying, I'm one of the rabbis at Temple Road of Shalom in Falls Church, Virginia. And I think maybe what I'll say briefly, just so that we can dive into this topic, is one of my strong interests is the Mishnah and the Talmud, which are sort of Jewish compilations of wisdom and reflection on like how do we practically live in the world. The Mishnah is about 1,800 years old, and we often say that the Talmud is about 1,500 years old. So they're both pretty ancient sources, but they grapple very deeply with questions of sort of how should we treat one another as human beings and what are our obligations to each other. And it was sort of in this context, some of these, I think it's really fascinating to know and make sense that people thousands of years ago were also grappling with some questions that we are today. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that has been carried forward to the present and added to in the present in really interesting ways. And so I'm happy to sort of dive in, if that works for you, Sam, into some of these both kind of like ancient wisdom about this and kind of potentially contemporary ways we can use it. Does that sound like an okay way to go in the conversation?
Yeah, and I want, so there are a couple of parts to that. Um, One, what do you do from the parent or the
Hmm.
caregiver perspective? And then, folks like me, what do I do? And if it's not just, I'm not only a parent, I'm a grandparent.
Hmm.
And one of the one of the dilemmas too are uh, what if, we've done very well financially, we're secure, we've planned well.
Hmm.
But what if this goes on and now I'm in a memory unit? Now everything that we had, there are people who face
Hmm.
having to go almost bankrupt, or they um, need their children to give them money to be in a memory unit and choose, and there's the choice. So I want to cover what are the obligation of each other, both sides, the parent
Hmm.
and the child or other family
Yeah.
members. And because, and then I do want to know and get into the ethical framework. One of the big movements out there, which I'm a counter voice to, is accompanied suicide. And that is, well, I'll just go to Switzerland and kill myself. That way they won't have to pay or won't have any risk on the family. And I don't want to be a burden to
Mm.
my family. Now, that burden, you can be financial or it can be just, I say in my play, one, uh, one day maybe the present Sam will just go away and someone else will occupy this body. And then I had not something else,
Hmm.
someone else, that I will still be human. And a lot of the language in these different fields, and then particularly the word, and I'll throw this, and I'm going to start get back. The word dementia, I think it is such a degrading word. It evokes end stage, and it's like, well, is a demented entity worth having around, as opposed to a human being who just, I say the Sam of me. I've written a place. I wonder what the Sam of me then will
Mm.
know of the Sam of me now. It will still be a human being.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so I am, maybe we could start, but I'm comfortable if we want to start elsewhere and have a bigger view. What are the ethical obligations, and maybe with, honoring your mother and father? Well, what if the father to my children becomes someone else? Am I still their father? And what are the obligations then? What are religious mandates around that stuff? Not mandates, but theory.
Yeah, no, these are very powerful questions. And I would say it's in Jewish thought, this is a source of really rich dialogue because, as you point out, these are complex questions. And the first thing I'd say before we get into sort of like some of the wisdom from Jewish tradition is that I think in any person's life and in any kind of family's life, the most important thing is their experiences and for them to sit down and know that they have resources in the community, including clergy, including other people who are happy to facilitate kind of conversations and thoughts. And so I want to make sure that nothing I'm about to say is meant as like a mandate if it really wouldn't make sense in your own life. I think it's important for people to feel like they have the power to have conversations and reach out for help to really think through their particular experiences. And so, with that really important caveat, I would say that in Jewish tradition, so the Torah, as you said very succinctly, Sam, the Torah includes this commandment to honor your parents, and there is a lot of thought in subsequent Jewish tradition about the complexities of that, and some of the issues that are raised as early as the Mishnah, so remember about 1800 years ago and beyond, include like, what if your parent asks you to do the wrong thing? And sort of scholars wrestle with this and say you shouldn't do something that is sort of morally wrong or breaks your system in a profound way because your parent asked you to, but you should think about other ways to honor them, right? So, what if your parent asks you to like rob a bank, let's say? That's not the example given in the Mishnah, but the answer to that category of things would be don't do it. Don't do it. Then there's a set of questions about who, if somebody needs more extensive care, who should fund that care, right? Which I think you just raised. And there are debates about that. So there are some voices in Jewish wisdom that say it should really be from the money of the person who needs the care. There are other voices that say it should also be from their relatives. I think the overarching principle that we could apply to this is um, Hillel the Elder put this really succinctly, but this is an important principle in Jewish thought. Um, Hillel said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And I think and he also added, if not now, when? Like it's never the wrong time to start doing the right thing. Um, there's this idea in Jewish thought that we should strive always both to take care of others and to take care of ourselves. And that when we are in a situation where it feels like those things are at odds, which is sometimes the case, we should ask for help and we should bring in other people and sort of other sources of wisdom to try to figure out how can we deconflict these things, right? So Jewish tradition wouldn't say that someone should do something that would harm them, like they are going to become unhoused because of, funding someone else, for example. There wouldn't be advocacy for like that you should give up everything and not be okay, but there would be advocacy for trying to think carefully about how can we show up for the people in our lives, and if we feel like there's a conflict between showing up for ourselves and showing up for the people in our lives, then it becomes a kind of an opportunity, hopefully, to have conversations with others and really try to work out how, as much as possible, we can like honor ourselves and honor others. And so that I think would be the really one of the biggest principles here. And that goes into you also,
Okay, okay.
yeah, go
On
ahead.
that, you triggered something in my
Yeah.
uh, memory or thought, and that's the kibbutzes or kibbutzim in Israel. So these are communities. They've changed in the
Yeah.
last decades, some somewhat differently, but they embody the communal responsibility to each other.
For sure.
And that's can be a political issue in our era that because it involves almost pooling of resources
Mm-hmm.
that you work not only for yourself but for the community
Mm-hmm.
and develops a communal requirement. Some are a little different now. Some are more capitalistic, if you will, or more traditional economic models. Others are still, I know one we've stayed at, been guest at a couple of times. Um, Now, they have an industry there. They make glass at that commune
Mm-hmm.
in a gigantic business, but all the revenue from the business goes to the commune equally, and they
Mm-hmm.
take care of each other. Now, that does suggest a model for care, which I sort of
Yeah.
you triggered that and I guess we could take it at different levels of community. We could
Mm-hmm.
say your city in today's words, city or geographic area, or state or political area, or it could just be a church area or an organizational area that make the decision that we're going to make sure everybody in our immediate community is taken care of. Um, what they don't do is leave people to their fate, so to speak. Well, if you didn't get enough insurance, that's your problem.
Yeah.
And go ahead and if you're unhoused, you just sleep on the streets. We don't believe in that, right?
No,
Or
not at
I don't know
all.
if that's the right way to do it, say it. But the issue is how to stop that in some ways.
I think a million percent. And you're making me think of, so in Jewish tradition, the institution of tzedakah, of kind of giving to charity, is a very old and very important institution. And there's this idea that um, tzedakah should be given by everyone and it should be for the neediest in the community, whatever that means. The Torah has this fascinating passage where it starts by saying there shall be no needy, like you should build a society where no one is in need. And then it says a few sentences later, there will always be people in need in your community. And so there's this interesting duality where it's sort of like we're striving for a world where everyone has what they need. And we know that we have not achieved that world yet. And so the question becomes how, to the best of our abilities, not just as nuclear family units, but as a
Right.
broader community, how, to the best of our abilities, do we provide for people at different stages of their life, navigating different kinds of needs? And it's a really important collective obligation that I think we all continue to wrestle with, both how do we fulfill this on a personal level and also how do we fulfill this as a community, and I think that there are lots of efforts. Kind of classical kibbutzim are one great example of an effort to sort of make sure everyone has what they need, as you were sharing. I think there are also efforts in communities, including here in the DC area, like, communities get together and they try to fund housing options for elders who are in need of housing, or, various things like that,
Yeah,
right?
there are what's called villages.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if there's senior village, but the village concept of creating a co-op or
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood that will have resources to help everybody stay well in their home. It's a variation on this theme, but what's interesting for me is that the intersection of this in how that then affects the existential part, the moral parts of these, not just to take care of people, but so the parent to child, child to parent, you don't get into these terrible dilemmas.
Mm-hmm.
But we sit and it's so complicated because within the family units there there are different levels of points of view maybe and disruption. Because when it gets to very, here I am, I'm so far doing really well with Alzheimer's,
Mm-hmm.
um, a neurocognitive disorder. I try not to use the word dementia.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we're seeing we may have to go into a memory unit at some point. Um, and we have family and we want to take care of our kids. But maybe we can go back to that one sort of issue I think I
Yeah.
mentioned, which is if you're in a family and here's somebody like me, and all of a sudden I begin to get dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
or I can scream and yell, I can see somebody not as my grandchild, but as an intruder, and you don't want to have that. Um, what is it? Can the family walk away, or what is the obligation at that point?
I think that classical Jewish thought would say that the obligation is to make sure that someone gets care and support, but that you don't personally have to be the providers of the care and support. And so I think that's a really important distinction
Yes.
because I think, you know, in a situation where someone's cognition is shifting in a way where they sometimes act in potentially like violent ways towards others, right? Which is a really tragic situation for everyone. And it's like, you know, that that person in a different moment in their life would have never wanted to, you know, be doing some of those things. I think that there are people in our world who have developed a lot of wonderful expertise about, you know, how do you work with someone in a kind and compassionate and caring way who is kind of navigating that, right? And like, how do you make sure they have what they need and that their days are going as well as possible, right? And I think that there's definitely it's definitely seen as a positive good, you know, if a family can connect someone with professional supportive parties who can use their expertise to help them in the best way possible. So there would still be an obligation to care about a person's well-being, but caring caring about a person's well-being and trying to help them ensure it doesn't mean that you need to be the person ensuring it. And in fact, like if you're let's say you're getting physically attacked by someone and you don't know techniques for sort of how to de-escalate the situation, um, you wouldn't be the ideal candidate to be sort of alone with that person, right? You know, you would be in better shape and that person would be in better shape if someone else who had relevant expertise could be sort of brought in. And so I think that that's an important principle here too, for sure.
Yeah. So the dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
So the dilemma, because there is a narrative out there, which is, well, and I probably would be the kind of person who could represent that dilemma. I'm not, but it could be. Well, we've done very well. We have children and grandchildren. But if it's going to take everything we save, not only everything we save, but if I get to the point where we spend everything we have, and now we're sort of arguing our children have an obligation to take everything they make and save to take care of their dad, why shouldn't I just go to Switzerland and kill myself? And so the question is about a company. What does Judaism say about the ethical and moral choice of accompanied suicide, which want to make clear, and we can touch on that too. This is different. Well, there are three levels here. There is affirmative suicide, where you go to Switzerland or any place else that allows you to take medicine to kill yourself. Then there is medical aid in dying, where which is legal now in a number of states in America,
Mm-hmm.
where if you meet certain criteria that you're going to die within 6 months, and if there is no other hope, and blah, 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 they have five doctors certify, a doctor can give you a lethal injection. That is medical aid in dying, but it is an affirmative act of taking a life. And then there is just let's just, they can't eat or drink. Let's don't force feed them. Let someone who is a car, in fact, I have even been part of a decision-making group about somebody where
Yeah.
we decided to withdraw care. They were
Yeah.
unconscious, and natural course of events, they passed as opposed to keeping them alive. So within that, from giving informed consent while you're awake and alive and can do it, and going in ending your life, to then having the medical aid once you're, what is Judaism? What are the ethical frameworks of that for us who are now in a phase where we're like sort of facing? And then, by the way, I think maybe not, Rabbi, but in 2006, the baby boomer generation turned 80. We're
Mm.
having this huge population enter their later ages of life and stages. These questions are going to be everywhere if they not aren't already.
That it's a really important set of questions, and I would say it's one. So one thing that's important before I start is to say that Jewish thought is the like collective wisdom of many Jewish people, and that means we're part of the conversation, and so are many others. And so these conversations are very dynamic right now. And so I want to briefly, and there are some sort of the three categories you named, I think are very helpful to our conversation because there are actually different Jewish responses to each one. And so I think that it's helpful to take each of those three. So what I would first say is that many people are aware that in Judaism, one of the highest values is preserving and saving life. And that sort of every person is seen as constituting an entire world and being of infinite value. And that doesn't change depending on a person's disability or health status or anything else, right? A person is always seen as infinitely valuable, containing a world within them and like their life as incredibly important. And in Jewish thought, a lot of other commandments can be suspended if if by suspending them you can save a life. Um, Now, that doesn't mean, and sometimes people feel pressured around this, in the 21st century, we have a lot of technology that can keep someone alive, like physically, um, in a situation that their body would not have been able to continue living in another time period. And also, like, right, like they may not even be aware of what's happening, right? This is like, we sometimes refer to this as taking extraordinary measures, right? Or things like that. Sometimes Jewish people feel like because they know Jewish tradition values life so highly, they feel like it must mean that they are obligated by Jewish law to absolutely take extraordinary measures and that like they're obligated by Jewish law to like not have a do not resuscitate order, for example, or things like that. That's not the case. Jewish law isn't saying that like all people do die, and people have a right to choose whether they want to enter hospice if that's the recommendation of their doctors, for example, right? They have a right to choose if they want to have a do not resuscitate order. Those things aren't not choosing life. That's sort of navigating the fact that death is the end of all of our lives, and sort of each of us gets to sort of think about to the, sadly, right, most people don't get to choose the manner of their death. But to the extent that we can say, oh, some of us have preferences, like do absolutely everything you can to keep me alive. And others might say, no, it's okay. I want a DNR or whatever else. And Jewish tradition would be very open to kind of that whole range of choices. So that's sort of the third thing you mentioned, Sam, the
Hmm.
on the other kind of extreme end of what you mentioned is someone taking their own life because they feel they would be a burden. And at this moment in time, that is very antithetical to how sort of Jewish thought and Jewish thinkers have seen the value of human life. The response there would very much be that it's really important that we work to make sure that people have the resources they need, right? And that if someone is feeling like the only choice they have might be to no longer exist, that there's so much we can and should do to try to support that person, that family as a collective. But that we want to help that person stay alive and stay in the world. Um, in the middle, what you termed medical aid in dying, and what it is, I think, an area that has also been very gray in Jewish thought, and there are different Jewish responses. So, before medical aid in dying was legalized anywhere in North America, there were a number of Jewish responsa. That's sort of like someone writes in a question to a committee of scholars and they pull resources and they sort of try to answer it, right? There were a number of responsa from different Jewish denominations kind of dealing with a hypothetical that didn't yet exist. Of if medical aid in dying were to be legal, would it be Jewishly permissible? And sort of at that time in the 20th century, the answer kind of across different Jewish movements was no, like that this wouldn't be a Jewish maneuver because of the obligation to choose life. More recently, as certain types of medical aid in dying have been legalized in different places in North America, although not all across North America, right? There have been Jewish scholars have re-engaged with this question, and one of the interesting places they've gone with it is to note that um, in Jewish thought, kind of classically, there is a thought that if someone is like suffering greatly, like that they're in great pain, that it could subjectively for that person, and again, this is really everyone knows for themselves, that for that person, it could be a mercy to be out of that pain, right? That person might feel that way if they are sort of on the edge of death and the choice is sort of like prolonging their life by a matter of days or not. And so more recently, like in the last 5 years, there have been some Jewish thinkers who have said that they think in a very limited number of cases, like someone has a terminal illness and they are, as you were kind of describing, and they are going to pass away very soon, and they have an option to kind of choose the manner of their death, by taking medicine rather than having a prolonged but still very imminent death, that there might be a way to see those as like existing within the boundaries of Jewish law and Jewish thought. And like all areas of Jewish thought, this middle ground is very much the source of kind of debate and conversation. And there are Jewish people who have very passionate views on multiple sides of the question, and Jewish scholars who have very passionate views on multiple sides of the question. But what I would say unequivocally is that that conversation is centered around the notion of suffering and alleviation of suffering, not around like the concept of a person being a burden, right? That this is a totally and sort of Jewish advocates for the legalization of medical aid in dying are usually, if they're coming at it from a Jewish religious perspective, talking about that very narrow category of a person's life is going to be ending imminently, and a person themselves is in a state of mind to make a decision, to make an autonomous decision, and they believe that they would prefer that their pain ceased sooner, knowing that there's not like that their life is ending soon. And so that's an area that's gray right now and where there's different Jewish thought, but it's not the situation you were describing of a person trying to alleviate kind of financial or other challenges for their family.
Yeah, I ran into a variation on that idea, and I love. First of all, thank you. I worry that we're going to bore our people. We're on this too long, but
Yeah.
there there is an argument that I'm finding a little bit persuasive, uh, and that's around what constitutes informed consent.
Mm,
And an example would be that they argue that I couldn't give informed consent because now I have the disease,
hmm
that there's a pressure on me that is unfair to be objective or makes it impossible. I can see both sides of those arguments, but I do think that there is something sort of persuasive to a degree about that. That's why sometimes I think just hard on and off buttons on certain things are easier and maybe even better. Would I choose not to? Of course, I think the answer is we'd all like to live. Um, and so, can I be objective about that when I'm changing my mind because now I have this disease?
hmm
Um, it's a bit of a circular argument, but it's complicated.
Yeah.
That's why people should go to temple and go to church and talk to the clergy and think about these things. Pre-planning is really, really important. And the need, I think, out there for resources. And objective resources, loving resources, which I use a word to say not necessarily purely medical,
Mm-hmm.
um, or I wish I had it's the first time I actually thought of that concept, but I think there are loving interactions, not necessarily, I mean, even a clergy would be a good person, or a counselor could be, or a best friend could be in that kind of discussion, as
Yeah.
opposed to hard, whether it's a doctor or a advocate or somebody who's already,
Yeah.
such a complicated, who knew, at least now I'm talking for a bit, who knew I'd be in this place?
Yeah.
But I just love that. And is there now, this is unfair. I didn't ask you to prepare for it, but
Okay.
is there a resource off the top of your head? I have been interviewed by Rabbi Richard Address,
Mm-hmm.
who is in Judaism has a elder care podcast and deals with the elder stuff. But are any resources that pop to your mind? Uh,
That's a really interesting question. I mean, there's the whole wise aging movement in
yes,
Judaism, right? Which I think is like there's both a book called Wise Aging, and then in many communities, including if listeners are tuning in from our region in the DMV, um, there's many opportunities for people to get together and like have facilitated conversations about sort of like how do I want to live my life as I'm aging and what will that look like and what are my hopes. There's also a series of conversations related to the subtopic we were just discussing about sort of advanced planning. There's a series of conversations called Death at the Dinner Table, which is sort of like getting people to talk about kind of what do you hope for, in your life, and also sort of what kind of advanced planning do you want to do. I will think a little bit more, and if I think about other resources, I'll maybe send you an email and perhaps they
sure.
could be included in writing. Does that sound okay?
Yes, and to bring us out of this,
Yeah.
real quick, there was an op-ed in the New York Times about a year or so ago, and I want to raise it. Two doctors wrote the op-ed. Their dad had been a doctor, and their dad had said to them when he was well and when they were younger, that if I ever get like that, and he said with Alzheimer's or dementia,
Mhm.
don't treat me if I get sick.
Hmm.
Well, time passes, he gets like that. He's in a memory unit, but he's happy
Yeah.
and gets pneumonia. And their dilemma was, wait a minute, he's happy. We see him right now, but he has pneumonia. Should we treat him? They didn't treat him. Their advice was, rather than being too specific in your paperwork, have a
Hmm.
committee who knows you. Be
Mm.
your children or a friend or clergy who would be on that. So they know you in that moment, in that time, where you might not be able to express it as you would have, and that you've changed your mind or
Hmm.
you're happy now when you couldn't have imagined
Yeah.
being happy in that place.
That's a
So
very powerful. Yeah.
yeah, that's taught me a lot too. Thank you, Rabbi, for so much for being with me and
Thank you so much.
um, helping me continue not only on this, but at our synagogue being part of the um journeys. And that's why it's so important to, I say so important. We're big believers in being members of congregations. Ours is Jewish, there are others, but I think they play a very important role in our communal lives larger. Um, so thank you, Rabbi Stein.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all you do in the world. I really appreciate it, and it was lovely to get to talk with you.